Good day class, I am Sir Vince, and before anything else, let us start by having a short moment for a prayer. Great! Now, before we start our lesson, let us have a short recall on the previous lesson that we have, and that is the 5 pillars of education. The first pillar is learning to know. This refers to our thinking, how we process information, and even our memory skills. The second pillar is learning to do. This refers to how we act or apply the knowledge that we have. The third pillar is learning to live together. This refers to the respect, acceptance, and cooperation of one another despite their diversity. The fourth pillar is learning to be. This refers to the continuous development of an individual through the first 3 pillars in order to become a more complete, fulfilled, and satisfied human being. And the 5th pillar is learning to transform oneself and society. These are the knowledge, values, and skills that we develop in order to change the society for the better. Now, let us proceed to our lesson, and it is all about intercultural communication. Our world today is characterized by an ever-growing number of contacts, resulting in the communication of different people with different cultural and linguistic backgrounds. This communication takes place because of the contacts between different areas or fields such as business, education, mass media, entertainment, etc. And also because of the immigration brought about by labor shortages or political conflict. Now, intercultural communication is simply the sending and receiving of messages across different languages and cultures. We have to remember that intercultural communication is more than just the mere exchange of words. It also includes the system of beliefs, values, and worldviews. Intercultural communication also involves the nonverbal communication aspects, which in most culture can have a significant impact. Now, let us proceed in discussing the elements of this intercultural communication. The first element is perception. This is about the beliefs, values, attitudes, worldviews, or even the social organization of a person. The second element is the verbal processes. These are the ways on how a culture employs symbols to portray meaning and human experiences. The third element is the nonverbal processes. These are the shared meanings, interpretations, and feelings of bodily behavior, time, and space. The fourth and last element is called contextual elements. This includes business, education, healthcare, tourism, and even personal relationships with one another that may affect the meaning of a communication. As to why do we need to study intercultural communication, we can enumerate it into 5 different reasons. Number 1 is because it increases our self-awareness. It increases our awareness of our own culture, our cultural identity, and our cultural background. Number 2 is demographic changes. These are the demographic shifts that countries and communities experience, resulting in more immigrants, refugees, and even undocumented individuals. Number 3 is workplace and economic globalization. In order for us to compete in the global market, we must also understand how businesses and cultural practices are conducted in other countries. Number 4 is creative problem solving. Through intercultural communication, we also develop our problem solving skills because we also learn from the people that are different from us. Number 5, the last one, is global and intrapersonal peace. Respect begets peace. And if we are at peace with ourselves, we will also be having more compassion and care for those that are around us. The reason why intercultural communication is important in the field of education is because the schools are becoming more and more culturally diverse. Successful educators are effective communicators, meaning they are culturally competent in cross-culture encounters. Also, communication is a useful source of intercultural knowledge, which may lead to the enrichment of the culturally diverse students if managed properly by the teacher. Otherwise, communication may lead to frustration, misunderstandings, and even school failure. Now let us proceed and talk about communication and language. Communication is the act or instance of sending and receiving a message. There are two types of communication. First, the verbal communication. This is the use of language, whether be it written or spoken. Second, the nonverbal. This is the use of gestures, bodily movements, and signs. Also, take note that in order for an effective communication to take place, these 6 components must be present: a sender, message, channel, receiver, feedback, and finally, environment. The development of information technology also had a huge impact on how people nowadays communicate each other, such as the creation of emails, weblogs, slide softwares, and telecommunications. Now let us talk about language. Language is a system of verbal and written symbols with rules on how these symbols can be put together in order for someone to convey a complex meaning. Language is important because it enables one person to share its ideas to another person. The study of language is divided into 4 general areas. The first one is phonology. This is the study of the system of sounds that a language uses. The second one is semantics. This is the study of word meanings and word combinations. The third one is grammar. This is the study of rules that governs on how these symbols or words must be put together in order. And the fourth one is pragmatics. This is the study of rules on how to use appropriate language in particular contexts. Language and culture are intertwined. A particular language usually points out to a specific group of people. When you interact with another language, you also interact to the culture that speaks that language. Culture is the characteristics and thought patterns of a certain group of people. Generally, we define culture using obvious categories such as language, religion, cuisine, and arts and traditions. Language is an integral part of culture. Human culture cannot exist without language. Also, true understanding of language requires the understanding of its surrounding cultures. Lastly, our observations and experiences, as well as our values, norms, beliefs, ideas, exist only because we were able to identify or experience all of these because of language. The next topic is about culture and its characteristics. But that will be discussed by Ma'am Jamilah, and this marks the end of my coverage. Once again, I am Sir Vince, and that's all I have to say. Ma'am Jamilah, please take over.
Good day, class. Welcome to the second part of the discussion. By the way, my name is Jamilah Guballo. You can call me Teacher Jam, and I will be your teacher for today. In this part, we will be talking all about culture. But before anything else, I would like to hear some words from you that you think has something to do with the word culture. Anyone who wants to try? Yes? Okay, very good. Yes, that's right. What about you? Definitely, those words are related to the word culture. And today, we will also be talking about its characteristics, components, and its organizations. To start with, I have here some significant definitions about culture. First, we have Ember in the year 1999. For him, culture is a set of learned beliefs, behaviors, attitudes, values, and ideas that are characteristics of a certain or particular society. Next, we have Calhoun in the year 1994. For him, culture is the learned norms, beliefs, knowledge, artifacts, languages, and symbols that are constantly communicated among people who share common way of life. Next, we have Alan Johnson in the year 1996. For him, culture is the sum total of ideas, symbols, forms of expressions, and material products associated with a society. While for Leslie A. White, it is the entire way of life of people and everything learned and shared by people in society. For Hofstad in the year 1997, he said that culture is consists of patterns, behaviors acquired and transmitted by symbols. And finally, UNESCO in the year 2002 defined culture as the set of distinctive material, spiritual, intellectual, and emotional features of society. Now let's move on to the next part of the discussion, which is all about the characteristics of a culture. The first essential characteristic of a culture is that culture is learned. And how do you think a culture can be learned? Anyone who has an idea? Yes? Okay, thank you, that's right. Another? Yes. Yes, correct. Another? Yes, that's right. Very good, class. You are all right. Because culture is learned through imitation, observation, and experiencing it. It is also learned by from the parents who are teaching in the family. The next characteristic is that a culture is shared by a group of people, wherein people of the same community share the same values, beliefs, and traditions in the society. And the next characteristic is that culture is cumulative, meaning knowledge is stored and passed on from one generation to the next, and new knowledge is being added to what is existing. Another characteristic is that culture change. That means that all cultural knowledge does not perpetually accumulate. At the same time, the new cultural knowledge or traits are added, but and some old ones are lost because they are no longer useful. Another characteristic is that culture is dynamic. This is the character of a culture that stems from its cultural or cumulative quality. That means no culture is ever in a permanent state. New ideas and techniques are always added, and the old ways are discarded and constantly modified. Another characteristic is that culture is diverse. That means culture is consists of a great many separate culture, and each of them are different from one another. And lastly, culture gives us a range and permissible behavior pattern, wherein culture tells us how a certain activities should be conducted. And now let's talk about the components of culture. The components of culture are communication, cognitive, behavior, and material. Firstly, let us talk about the communication component, which is consists of language and symbols. Language is the core of all culture. That means when people share the same language, they share a condensed and flexible set of meanings and symbols. It is also the basis for the symbolic. Symbols, on the other hand, forms the backbone of interaction. A symbol is anything that carries a particular meaning, shared or recognized by people who share culture. And the next component is the cognitive component, which is about how we think within a culture. It is consist of number one, idea, beliefs, and knowledge. And number two, values. And number three, accounts. When we talk about values, it is about the desirability, goodness, and beauty, which serves as broad guidelines for for social living. And accounts are how people use their common language to justify, rationalize, excuse, or legitimize their behavior to themselves and others. The third component of a culture is behavioral component, or the how we act. It is also composed of a norms, which norms has different types, which are the mores, laws, rituals, and folkways. Norms are the rules and expectations by which society guides the behavior of its member. It changes and varies over time depending on the situation, and they are reinforced through the punishments and or sanctions, which take the form of reward or punishment. And norms has four types. These are the mores, laws, rituals, and folkways. The first type of norms is the mores. They are the customary behavior patterns or folkways which have taken on a moralistic values. Example for this is the respect for authority. The next one is the laws. It constitutes the most formal and important norms. Laws are more deemed so vital to dominant interests that they become translated into legal formalizations that even the non-members of society are required to obey. And the third one is the folkways. Folkways are the behavior patterns which are repetitive and organized. It is also commonly known as customs. Once established and accepted, these patterns are endorsed by most members of the society and become the way of their folk or their folkways. And the last type of norms is the rituals. These are highly scripted ceremonies or strips that follow a specific sequence of action. They occur at predetermined times or triggered by a specific use. Example for this are the ceremonies such as wedding, baptism, and graduation. And the last component of culture is the material component. It refers to the objects or the physical objects of cultures such as machines, equipments, tools, books, clothing, and etc. The forms and functions of these objects is an expression of culture, and culturally defined behavior often depends on the presence of this object. And now when we talk about the organization of culture, we have to remember two ideas. The first one is the cultural traits and the second one is the culture complexes. Cultural traits is the small unit or element of a culture. It represents or it is either material or a non-material culture that represents a single or combination elements that is related to a specific situation. For example, the kissing of the hand of the elders after the Sunday Mass or Angelus. While for the culture complexes, it is consists of the cluster of culture traits. And when they are grouped together, they form a culture pattern. And we have three ways on how a culture is transmitted. Culture is transmitted through enculturation, acculturation, and assimilation. Enculturation is the process of learning culture of one's own group. For example, I am a Filipino, then I am learning the Filipino language and the values of the Filipino. While the acculturation is the process of learning some new traits from another culture. For example, when a students from rural area migrate to the urban area or city, and they gradually learn some traits or customs in that specific place, then they become acculturated. And lastly, culture is transmitted through assimilation. Assimilation is the term used for a process in which an individual entirely loses his previous identity and takes on the culture and attitudes of another group. And now let's talk about cultural relativism. I'm sure that you would agree that it is impossible for us to interpret or analyze what the actions of members of the other group means, especially if we will interpret them in terms of our own motives and values. Therefore, we must interpret their behavior in the light of their motives, habits, and values. And for the conclusion of today's discussion, remember class that throughout the world, human beings use thousands of languages to communicate. Every society has its own culture, no matter how simple the culture may be, and every human being is cultured. And lastly, understanding a culture, its elements and characteristics, its organizations, and how it is transmitted will provide us a better appreciation of the different culture of the people whom they may relate now or in the future. And after watching this video, I'd like you to visit our Google Classroom for your assignments and activities. That's all for today. Goodbye!